This morning there's really two images, two stories that have been swimming around in my head, two memories. Some are a little bit shocking. One is flattering but sad, but still flattering. But I'll go ahead and give you those images, those stories now. My first teaching job was in New York at a Catholic school. And it was in Queens, East Elmhurst, Queens, rough area, poor area, crime-ridden area, and a lot of single-parent families. But across the street from the school, there was this soul food restaurant that was very good. And I used to go over there. And it wasn't one of those restaurants where you sit down and have a menu. You just ask, what are y'all cooking today? And like I said, they made great soul food. But there was a lady there, I think her name was Miss Jackson, if I remember right. And I kind of knew her because some of her kids went to our school. So I just asked about her family, the kids, and I asked about her husband or their daddy. To which she responded, and I quote, "Oh, no daddy in my house. I'm a single parent mama. And that's just the way I like it." Now, with that in mind, if I fast forward about 20 years, maybe less than that, my first assignment as a priest was an associate at St. Helens in Georgetown, big parish, school, lots of people. And there was lots of activity. I remember there was a 4 or 5-year-old girl who used to follow me around. And she used to just grab my hand as we went from place to place there on the campus. To the point where sometimes I would say, "Honey, you need to go find your parents. I have to say Mass now. Come on." And one time she walked away. As she walked away, she said, "I wish you were my daddy." Again, sad but flattering. I was flattered. But you have these two images. Someone's okay with no daddies in the house, and someone who longs for a daddy in the house. Jesus spent several years forming men. First, it was just the 3, Peter, James, and John, and then another 9. Forming them to do what, or to be what? Well, I would say he formed them to be priests, shepherds, bishops, fathers. To be strong priests, shepherds, bishops, and fathers, those 12 guys. Now, on Good Friday, did they show out as what strong and brave men they were? No. Most of them kind of failed that initial test, but not so much on that Good Friday. However, in the Acts of the Apostles today, we see this image of Peter post-Pentecost. The same guy who said 3 times, "I don't know him, I don't know him, I don't know him," because he was a coward, he was afraid. The same guy is now telling those in charge, we must obey God rather than men. And you saw it, they're getting chewed out. Didn't we tell you to stop preaching in that man's name and stop putting his blood on my hands, our hands? We told you to stop. Notice what Peter doesn't say. "Hey, and we're sorry. We didn't mean to cause any problems." No. He said we must obey God rather than men. So what is Peter doing? I would say Peter is finally embracing his role amongst the apostles, and his role in the early church. And what was that role? What was it? Well, let's talk about that. What was it? And I think we have to go way back. And so what I'm going to say here today is going to be strange, especially to American ears, because we believe in democracy, or we say we do. We really have a republic, but we talk about that. We believe in democracy. But when you look back on Judeo-Christian history all the way back, we find out real quick that Judeo-Christian history is not a democracy. It is a monarchy. And that sounds strange to our ears too, because we rejected a monarchy. And here I'm going to say another cuss word: patriarchy. So in other words, Adam was head of his wife. Noah was the head of his family. Abraham was the head of the clan. Moses was the head, the leader, the priest of his nation. And David was head of the kingdom. He was a king of the kingdom. And Jesus is head of the church. He's the head of the church. But Jesus did not leave us headless. He didn't. He said, okay, guys, I'm leaving. He didn't say, I'm leaving, guys, and just kind of decide what people want to do, take a vote, have an election. He didn't say anything like that. He gave them authority to be what? To be fathers, to be priests, to be bishops, to be shepherds. And I would also say that today, especially in the Acts of the Apostles and the gospel, you see Peter taking his role that we call a pope. When Jesus says to him, singles him out, which he does many times, singles him out and says, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. Points him out. And to take his role as the first pope into this fancy term that we call the Petrine ministry. It is its own ministry, the ministry of Peter. And I would also argue, and if you're interested in this, there's a great theologian out there who has his own podcast, Joe Heschmeyer. He's the head of a group called Shameless Popery. He's fantastic. But he makes the argument that the role of the papacy is not the most important part of our faith. The most important aspect of our faith is the Trinity, the divinity of Christ, the Mass, that there is a God. But the office of the papacy is the most distinctive. It is the most distinctive. In other words, if Jesus founded the papacy, everybody should be Catholic. If he didn't start the papacy, the role of Peter, the Pope, then nobody should be Catholic. It's that critical. And we see this dripping all over Scripture, especially in the New Testament. How does he single out Peter and his ministry? Well, in Matthew 16, 18, and Matthew 18, when Peter makes his famous confession, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, Jesus singles him out, changes his name from Simon to Peter, calls him the rock. Upon the rock I will build my church, and then gives him the keys of the kingdom. What does that mean? What does the keys of the kingdom mean? Well, it's a sign of authority, a sign of an office, of passing on authority. It is both a privilege and scary when you hand over the keys. I mean, some of you have teenage children, and you've had that experience of handing your son or your daughter the car keys, and 16-year-old son, why don't you drive? And then you get in the car with them. That's a sign of authority and passage, but it's also kind of scary. It's passing on your authority. He changes his name, singles him out, gives him the keys of the kingdom and the power to forgive and retain sins, the power to bind and loose. Only God can do that. Only God can do that. And those he's given the authority to do so. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. Wow. He's passing that on. He's not leaving them headless. But my favorite, as people who go to St. Luke Catholic Church, in the Gospel of Luke, Luke 22, Jesus singles Peter out and says, you know, the devil has asked for you guys, and I have prayed for you, Peter, that when you have turned, he says something amazing to him. When you have turned, you must strengthen your brothers. When you have turned, singular, when you have turned, you must strengthen your brothers. So amongst the 12, there was one guy whose job it was to keep the other ones together. That's a distinctive ministry. That is called the Petrine ministry. And in today's Gospel 21, again, he makes that famous request, prayer, demand. even you could say, in some sense, an ordination. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. So what was he making? He was making him into a father. Again, a priest, a bishop, a shepherd. And what is the role of a pope, bishop, priest, father? What are they supposed to do within the family? Take a vote? No, they protect, they teach, they lead, and they sanctify. That's the role of a father. First of all, to protect his family, not just physically, which is something he's called to do, but also from heresy, from wolves in sheep clothing. That a father has eyes that maybe his children don't. Usually that plays out when a 16-year-old boy comes to pick up your 16-year-old daughter, and you can see that this boy, he needs to fear you, and that's a good thing. But also to recognize there are sheep in wolves' clothing, wolves in sheep's clothing, that our young people oftentimes are poisoned by the secular world. And once they've embraced secular dogmas, it's hard for them to get rid of them. They're also called to teach the truth, and there's such thing as truth, to catechize, to celebrate truth. Truth is always compassionate and loving. Truth is sometimes not easy. It isn't. I told someone today, they said something like, well, you can be whatever you want. I said, I've always wanted to be 6'4". I even told the altar service, I self-identify as 6'4". And they did just that. They laughed at me. But that's just who I am inside, But that's silly. Welcome to our 2025. But you're also a priest, a bishop, a father. Is supposed to lead. Get out front. In front of church militant, as you will. When I was preparing this, I remember several bishops that did indeed do this. And I appreciate them. When I was in seminary up in Dallas, in Irving, the Bishop of Dallas was Charles Grumman, Bishop Grumman. And he did something that I was just floored about. Next to the chancery, just down the road from the chancery, they built a Planned Parenthood. And he, in many ways, on his own right away, just on Saturday would walk over there, kneel down and say his rosary in front of the Planned Parenthood, or Klan Parenthood as I call it. And people saw that. Priests saw that. Lay people saw that and just joined him. And the next thing you know, that place was surrounded and shut down. Why? Because a priest, a father, a bishop got out in front. Got out in front. I saw Bishop Barron do this once back in our famous year of 2020 when they were tearing down statues of saints, especially in California. And they were tearing down the statue of St. Juniper Serra. And Bishop Robert Barron put his little cap on, got out there, and stood out in front of the statue and said, no, this is not okay. You don't get to do this. Who was he being? He was being a father. He's being a protector, a bishop, a priest, because that's what we are meant to do. But my favorite story is, we go back about over 1,000 years, I suppose. Pope Leo the Great in 435 or something like that, when the Roman Empire was falling and Attila the Hun and his armies were sacking the Roman Empire, they were headed for Rome. Pope Leo the Great was kind of this feeble old pope, and they said to him, Your Holiness, we got to get you out of Rome. Attila the Hun is coming, which would terrify anybody. And little feeble Pope Leo the Great said, no, I'm going to go talk to him. So he gets on their horses and they gallop out and they meet Attila the Hun, and Leo gets off his horse, and we don't know the conversation, how that went down. I don't think Pope Leo the Great spoke Mongol, and I don't think Attila the Hun spoke Latin. But somewhere in translations, he talked to him and said, please don't do this. Please don't sack Rome. Please leave our people alone and the churches alone. And Attila the Hun said, okay, and turned around. Why? Because a man faced him. A father came out and talked to him. A bishop, a pope, a priest. This is what Jesus gave us in the Petrine ministry, because that's the way he liked it. That's the way he saw it was fitting. And it is for us too. So we're asked today in a special way to remember, in some sense, we're a little fatherless. We have no pope. We have no bishop. And you guys are stuck with us for the remainder until that's remedy. But as we speak, within the next 3 days, the cardinals are making their way to Rome, and most of them are there. And what are they doing? They're preparing to pick us a new pope in that conclave. So we're asked to pray for them, and we will do that today. Pray that they pick who the Holy Spirit wants, and that we never get used to fatherless families. And know that somewhere inside of us we recognize that we need that. Because we also recognize, again, that we are not a democracy. The church is a family, and families need good daddies.